Hello ladies and gentlemen, it's Mike here at Game From Scratch and welcome to 2022. Let's hope this year is a heck of a lot better. I figured there's no better way to start off 2022 than a quick recap of 2021 in the world of game development. Think of this as a TLDR. And a ton happened in 2021 and a lot of it was on the mergers and acquisition front of things, as we will see as we go through these stories. Now I'm not going to cover all of the game development releases, all the game edge releases that happened through the year, but I'll try to get to the major ones. On top of that, we're also not going to talk about the Epic versus Apple lawsuit because that was its own thing. I covered it in its own videos. Just know that happened, that resolved, and nobody really won. All right, so first thing of the news from 2020, back in January, Epic Games acquired Rad Game Tools. Now, Rad Game Tools have been around for years and years and years. Their big products were Bink and Oodle, compression-based products, but they also make telemetry tools, Miles Sound System, Granny's 3D animation software, and so on. And what they did is they started incorporating all of these projects, specifically Bink and Oodle, into Unreal Engine, which is definitely a cool thing to see. Existing customers for Rad Tools were not impacted by the acquisition. Next up, we have another acquisition. That was YoYo Games acquired by Opera. So the Opera browser company bought GameMaker creator YoYo Games. Now this actually had some implications some results as the game goes on that definitely had an impact on the way GameMaker works, as we are going to see later on in the year. Next up, we have Stride 4 Game Engine was released. Now, I'm going to mention this one mostly because of the lack of releases. Stride may even be new to you. It's actually Zenko, which before that it was called Paradox. It's an open source C# game engine originally created by Silicon Studios. Now, the part that's scaring me a bit is this is the last release we saw. And truthfully, there wasn't a ton in this actual release. So a little worrying there. Their first and only release of the year was way back in February. Again, we also had Cocos Creator release. There was a number of Cocos Creator releases through the year, but Cocos Creator 3 is the one I'm going to highlight because this is where they moved into the world of 3D. Yes, Cocos Creator is a full 2D and 3D game engine at this point in time. So that release happened back in February. They actually closed the year by releasing, I think it was 3.4. So there were a number of releases through the year, but the 3.0 release was the move to 3D. Big deal there. MetaHuman, creator from Unreal Engine, was announced. This is actually available now. It is a way to make staggeringly good-looking, realistic humanoids in Unreal Engine, either Unreal Engine 4 or 5. A combination of companies they acquired, Cubic Motion and 3Lateral. It's a cloud-powered tools for creating realistic characters. So that was first announced back in February. At this point in time, you can actually play with it and use it, and it's kind of scary. Another announcement that happened this year was Houdini Engine is now free for Unity and Unreal Engine. Now, do not think that Houdini is free, as I saw from my comment section about me trolling. No, people, just read the damn headline. No, what happened is Houdini Engine, this is the real-time runtime version, allows you to take work from the Houdini procedural 3D graphics tool and use it in your game. It allows you to run their simulations in other applications such as Max Maya, Unreal Engine, and the Unity game engine. So the Unity and Unreal Engine users will now be able to use Houdini Engine in their games completely free. You still have to buy Houdini, or at least someone on your team needs to have Houdini. Next up, Flutter 2 got desktop and web support. There were another release at the end of the year, Flutter 2.5, I think we got up to. But this was the big deal here, is because this is the one that actually made it so it was actually viable. So Flutter was only for mobile before. Now what we've got with the release of the 2 version is Mac, Linux, and Windows support were added. On top of that, you've also got web support. So now you can use Flutter for cross-platform game development. We also looked at a game engine called Flame. So if you want to work with the Dart programming language and the Flutter cross-platform environment, as of Flutter 2 in March, it now has desktop and web support, making it much more viable for cross-platform game development. And back to acquisitions. Epic Games acquired Capturing Reality, and they also really lowered the price. Like, they lowered the price a lot. Something like so a quarter of the existing price. Now, Capturing Reality is a 3D scanning company. So if you're trying to, basically do photogrammetry work, that's what Capturing Reality is all about. I did a video on it. It's a very cool program. It's a lot cheaper to work with now thanks to Epic Games acquiring it. And when you see something like the Quixel Megascans library of 3D objects, a lot of those were acquired using photogrammetry. And that's what Capturing Reality is all about. Next up, Storm Engine was open sourced. Now, it was open sourced under the GPL v3 license, which is very limited in what you can do with it. but it's still an interesting project, especially if you are working on a GPL project yourself. This is the game engine behind several games such as Sea Dogs and Pirates of the Caribbean. I've never actually played any of those games, but I know they definitely have their loyal fans out there. So the engine for those games is now available. On top of that, we also had Flax Engine. Flax Engine actually got a pair of releases, Flax Engine 1.1 and 1.2 through the year. Big thing we got in here is it did get Linux support, which is definitely nice. It's an interesting engine. I did do a hands-on with it. It's a C# powered engine. It's got a lot of features and functionalities in it. There were 2 releases through this year, but the big thing here is they do have Linux support now as well. Dialogic was released for the Godot game engine. Dialogic is a completely free, open-sourced, conversation-based engine. You can see it in action. It's a very cool system. I highly recommend checking that out. So that was one of the releases that happened for the Godot game engine. On the topic of releases, the Unigine game engine got 2. So Unigine 2.14 was released, and at the very end of the year, 2.15 was also released. Unigine can be powered by C#, C++, Unigine script. And the big thing is they made an indie version for game developers that was $100,000 a year. If you make that much or less, it is free to use. Problem is a lot of the things they added in subsequent releases were only in their commercial version, especially in their 2.15. So I wonder if they're walking back a little bit from the game development engine area for indie game developers. Unfortunately, if that's the case, but it's still a very cool engine, one I recommend you check out. It's one of the most beautiful out-of-the-box game engines you can get. We have another release here, so we've gone from, it was available in early access and then in beta and then early access, and now I think it might actually be available, is Cascadeur. Now, Cascadeur enables you to do AI-assisted animation. Really neat product for sure. We finally got some pricing on what it was going to cost. It's subscription-based, but if you make less than 100K, it is free, $15 per user per month. So if you're not the world's greatest animator or you want to have some artificial intelligence helping you with your animations, Cascadeur is definitely worth checking out, and throughout the year, it basically is now production ready. So next up, we have Godot releases. Godot 3.3 was released. There was a lot more moved into the 3.x releases. Now, spoiler alert for the rest of this window, if you are waiting for Godot 4, you're still waiting. All right, so that's going to come sometime in 2022, the initial release. Hopefully, we will get a final release in 2022, but do not quote me on that. But the good news is they added a ton of functionality into the Godot 3, including so I'm going to mix up from various different versions. There was 2D batching was added in, something that was highly asked for. Improved FBX importer. There's a web version of it. ARM64 support is in there as well for people with the new M1 Max. You can run it entirely in the web. On top of that, later on, they also add some occlusion culling finally. So there's a lot of functionality that was backported to 3.x branches from Godot 4, but sadly, no Godot 4 this year. All right, so also we had the Ultra App Kit was released. Confusing name. What this is a GUI for high-performance tools. Later in the year, there was another release that added Linux support as well. So if you're looking for an alternative to something like Qt, for doing UI development, Ultra App Kit's a very lightweight option that was released this year. Also, DRIM GUI is probably the most established one. Now, back in the world of acquisitions, Epic Games also acquired ArtStation, and they also made their training free for the rest of 2021. And the cool thing is, at the end of 2021, they also said, okay, the training materials for ArtStation are now free for, well, the foreseeable future. I don't know if they actually said forever, but for the foreseeable future. So this was definitely nice. They also dropped all of the commissions and the costs to join and sell on their market. So if you sell in the ArtStation marketplace, it went from 30% down to 12%. And a further reduction for pro members. So definitely a nice thing there. This is one I watched over the years. Basically is Material Maker. This is written on top of the Godot game engine. It's kind of like Substance Designer Lite. It's a really cool program. A single developer is behind it, and it just keeps improving at a staggering rate. The cool thing here is with the 0.95 release, they added rudimentary, for sure, but rudimentary 3D painting tools, so you can paint your materials directly onto your 3D objects. This is a program to keep an eye on for sure, especially because it's free. Next up, we have BuildBox. BuildBox had a year. Woo! Yeah, they had a year. They changed their pricing, and they went full stupid mode. So they actually went to a 70-30 pricing model where the developer gets 30%, they take 70%. So yeah, that was... well, there's my video on it. BuildBox lose their mind. By the way, there will be links for all of these stories down below, so if you want to learn anything more about any particular one, the stories will be down there. But yeah, BuildBox shot both their feet off. It was really kind of amusing, actually. MagicaVoxel, the maker of MagicaVoxel created a new project called MagicaCSG. CSG standing for, I know I have it written here, but it's constructive solid geometry. Basically, it's sort of like making shapes out of compound shapes. It's an interesting way of modeling things. You're basically creating a 3D shell around objects. New modeling tool from the maker of MagicaVoxel, and like MagicaVoxel, it is free. Also, MagicaVoxel's development was supposed to have ended, but he's actually done a couple of updates to it, which is kind of cool. Unreal Engine 5 was released in early access. Unreal Engine 5 is, yeah, it's probably the thing that a lot of people are most excited for. We've got the big ones there are lumens and nanites. The idea there is real-time lighting and unlimited polygon budgets. If they pull that one off, it's really going to change the way people make games. The other thing is they really updated the user interface in it, and the new user interface makes going back to the old Unreal Engine user interface so painful. So that has gotten a number of updates through the year, but it is still not available for public. Well, no, it's not available for production work. Anyone can check it out. Just know Unreal Engine 5, it's also another 2022, fingers crossed, release. No guarantee there. Now, BuildBox realized that they were full-on epic stupid and tried to walk it back, so they changed the revenue share on everything. They made pro versions can actually integrate their own ad networks, and they're not going to take money from it. So basically, they realized that they got super greedy, super stupid, and tried to undo it. At this point in time, though, I don't know how much of the damage was done. They got really dunked on, which is kind of hilarious. A lot of people like Construct 2 started offering like real cheap versions for existing BuildBox customers and so on. So yeah, that was a fun oops. Another one big on this year, and this is sort of a catch-all post, and I highly recommend you check this out, is Omniverse. Now, Omniverse is sort of a bridge technology from NVIDIA, and the big thing behind it is USD. Now, USD had a huge year. USD support is kind of coming to everything, and what USD kind of allows, it's a universal scene description format created by Pixar, and what it allows you to do is basically take a scene from a content creation level, so like Max, Maya, Blender or whatever, or at a game engine level, and move it between platforms, but have like 100% fidelity to what you had originally. Right now, there is a USD exporter from Unreal Engine. So what you can see is actually take an Unreal Engine scene and export it into, say, Blender, and it looks identical. There was a huge USD movement this year, and Omniverse is kind of a server hub technology bridge and a bunch of tooling built on top of USD that kind of makes the whole ecosystem work. It's a pain in the ass to set up, but I highly recommend you check it out, or at the very least, just watch the video, and you can see what Omniverse and USD are all about, but a big year for USD for sure. Here we go back to the whole, remember Opera bought YoYo Games, who make GameMaker. Well, they also released a free version through the year, but you can't create shareable executables with it, but it allows you to have full functionality of GameMaker. Check it out for free. Long overdue. I think YoYo Games should have had this all along, to be honest, but definitely a nice development there. And then we have Lumberyard. Lumberyard is a fork of CryEngine. Basically, Amazon paid Crytek a ton of money so they could use CryEngine. Never worked out all that great for them, and then they ended up rebranding Lumberyard to O3DE, or the Open 3D Game Engine project, and there's a number of companies behind these guys. You can see kind of a list of them here: Adobe, Audiokinetic, and so on and so forth. Hawaii is there, Intel. A lot of people are behind this. Side Effects Software, Wargaming, oddly enough. So there are a number of companies that are supporting this project. It is completely open source game engine. A lot of the subsystems that were commercial before had to be rewritten to be fully open source compatible. But basically, Lumberyard is now free and open source, and it's now called O3DE. Now, it's not flawless. They did a public release at the end of last year. I did a video on it. It's not a happy video. It's not a happy release, but they're getting there. Give them some time. It will be a good project in the end, I think. Another interesting game engine out there is the Machinery. Now, this is from the same guys who did BitSquid and Fat Shark, the engines that power, what was their ultimate called? Stingray game engine that Adobe bought, the game engine behind Vermintide Tides games, and so on. They're starting a new game engine, which is now available at this point in early access. I believe it's actually one step further. You can actually buy it and start using it. It is the Machinery. Now, the Machinery by Our Machinery. This game engine, as you can see, it's fairly cheap on the whole. It's kind of an engine for, or a scaffold for creating your own game engines in it, but it had a number of releases throughout this year. Definitely an interesting one to keep an eye on. MicroStudio game engine. This is kind of an intro level for kids and hobbyists and such to come in and learn game development really simple. You can work entirely in your browser. You can create some really cool games with it without a ton of effort required. It went fully open source this year. I did a video on it back in October 2020, and I was really impressed with it, to be honest. And if you're trying to get kids interested in game development, or you just want to play around with something, MicroStudio is definitely one of those projects worth checking out. And let's go back to the world of acquisitions. Epic Games acquired Sketchfab. Now, Sketchfab is kind of new to me. I don't really know the whole ramifications of picking that one up, but they also immediately changed the fees down to their Epic Games standard of 12%. So more acquisitions there. Also, the technology will ultimately be brought in, but Sketchfab is the largest repository of 3D models. Oh, sorry, I'm mixing Sketchfab up with a different thing from later on. Another acquisition, by the way. Yeah, Sketchfab it's the repository for online models. Basically, it took over for like TurboSquid and so on. And in this acquisition, they really kind of lowered the price down. So if you're selling on Sketchfab, you're making a lot more money now. They make some other deals with Sketchfab throughout the year. There's more available there. I think they upgraded their servers and so on as well throughout the year. But yeah, Epic Games now owns Sketchfab. In terms of acquisitions, Unity also acquired SpeedTree. SpeedTree is kind of the fast tree technology, middleware technology, standard for AAA games for years, used by companies such as Epic, ironically, CD Projekt Red, and Bungie. There is integrations into Unreal, Unity, and the Lumberyard / O3DE. Actually, I don't know if O3DE got game engine integration yet, but SpeedTree stayed kind of the same. I don't know that there were any changes, to be honest, after Unity acquired them, but Unity now owns SpeedTree. So like I said, there were a lot of acquisitions this year. And then we got another one on the GameMaker front. This one, yeah, this is called a double-edged sword. They reduced the prices, and they moved to a subscription-only model. Yeah. They also dropped the price, I believe, one more time throughout the year. I don't believe I covered that in this recap. But yeah, GameMaker is now subscription software. I know so many of you love that. Now, in the world of acquisitions, Unity bought another company called Parsec. Now, Parsec is one I haven't actually worked with. They seem a lot like, say, Shadow or even like GeForce Now. It's kind of a remote desktop software, but more on the high end and the performance side of things. And since we all kind of got locked down this year and had to do a lot more remote work, these kind of acquisitions make a lot of sense. $320 million worth of sense? Hard to say. Then again, Unity did recently go public and is worth billions upon billions of dollars now, so they've been on a bit of an acquisition spree, as we will continue to see as the year goes on, because we are halfway through the year in August right now. All right, so we had a release of Unreal Engine. Again, I don't really get into the Unreal Engine and Unity releases that much throughout the year. They had some really nice releases as they went through. As I mentioned earlier on, they implemented the technologies they acquired earlier from Rad Game Tools in this particular release, and of course, you had like just the improvements across the board. So I'm not going to get into a ton of the details there. One big thing we saw, especially on the Unreal Engine side, but a little bit on the Unity side, is they're both really moving into the film and media production side of things. So there was a lot of improvements in that area as well. GDevelop 5 finally left beta. It's been beta for years. So GDevelop 5 is now basically considered production ready, which is kind of cool. The release itself was pretty minor, but that is a pretty major milestone on the whole. So GDevelop 5 is now considered production ready. GDevelop 5 is sort of like an open source construct GameMaker kind of area. You program using either JavaScript kind of to do the backend logic, but mostly you're using like this visual spreadsheet kind of approach to things. If you've never checked it out, I highly recommend checking it out because it is free. On top of that, RayLib hit a pretty milestone release this year as well. They did a couple of releases, but the big one, of course, is RayLib 4 was released in November. So you can see here we went a month or two of in terms of news, but yeah, the major release there. They did a lot of cleanup across the board. It's very nicely decoupled. Support for a ton of different languages, including in RayLib 4. We now have Odin and Zig. I think I've checked out both of those programming languages, and I've been doing more programming language kind of coverage as well on the channel. But RayLib has support for something like 40 plus different programming languages at this point as well. If you've never checked it out, it is a game library / framework, completely modular, so you can use bits and pieces of it if you want. So if you just want to use their math libraries, you can. Just want to use their sound libraries, you can. Their input libraries, their graphics library, whatever. It's all decoupled from each other. It is entirely open source. It is written in C, but it has bindings for every language you could imagine. RayLib is really nice. Do check it out, especially if you're kind of more on the beginner side of things and you're looking for a 2D graphics library to get yourself up and running making games with C++ or C. RayLib is probably one of the best choices you're going to find. Another release there is we have Godot 3.4 was released. Another big thing about this one is, again, we're all waiting for Godot 4, but a lot of stuff got backported to 3.4. The really nice thing in this particular release, as I kind of hinted at with the 3.3 release, is occlusion and occulling was added to to Godot. Definitely nice there. So it allows you to kind of split up your level logically inside of the game engine so that it can perform quite a bit better. Also has support for large files and a number of other things. Quite a few, again, features that were developed for Godot 3 were brought back. So for Godot 4 were brought back to Godot 3 through the year. Also, you can now export your 3D scenes as GLTF, which is kind of neat. So if you want to take a project and bring it into Blender or something like that as a GLTF file, you can do so. Or even oddly enough, if you decide, okay, I want to switch game engines, you can at least get your assets over in a relatively simple manner, which is nice. And back in the land of acquisitions, again, this was an acquisition-heavy year. Unity acquired WETA Digital, not WETA, WETA Digital. Now, this is the software arm of WETA. Now, WETA is the effects company, Peter Jackson's effects company behind Lord of the Rings, Kong, you name it, and a number of, they don't just do Peter Jackson's works, but these are the tools that they make. A lot of them are in integrated into Maya or Houdini or whatever. So they do have WETA H as a set of tools for Houdini. A lot of their technology is cloud-based. It's going to be interesting how this is ultimately monetized, but all of the special effects software side of WETA is now owned by Unity, including the development teams behind it. Pretty major acquisition there for sure. Like I said, they're all definitely moving into the world of movie production, and that was Unity buying their way in a big way. And then we've got, let's end, or we're getting near the end anyways, and we're going to start this on off with a swear word, NFT. NFT kind of, they invaded the world, and there's a company out there that actually invested money, which is great, all in projects I like. Defold, Phaser, and Godot, and Blender all got funding from an NFT company, and I just kind of threw this story in here just in general because NFTs, blockchain, blah, 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 Web3, blah, 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 blah. They're all really dominating the space for better or for worse in terms of news. I would recommend check out this video. It's my attempt to be as introductory and unbiased as I can from my end. Explanation of just what the heck a blockchain and an NFT are. So if this whole thing confuses you, do be sure to check out this video. I try to explain it as best as possible. But the world of NFTs and the world of game development collided in a big way in 2021, and it's going to get worse in 2022. Speaking of 2022, Visual Studio 2022 was released. This also had a number of incremental bumps, including C#10, F#6, and .NET 6. .NET 6 is now just .NET. There's no more core. There's no .NET framework. There is just .NET 6, which is nice. Also, Visual Studio is a 64-bit application for the first time. There's also Edit and Complete, which is a feature I have never trusted on anything ever. So if you're doing some C++ code, you made a change to it, you now have hot reload in there. Again, not something I particularly trust, but one of the features they added in Visual Studio 2022. Interesting project for sure. Next up, we have Wave Engine. Wave Engine is an interesting project. I've never really understood the commercial model behind it, but it is a C# game engine I dubbed the best game engine nobody uses. Well, it is now the best game engine nobody uses, known as Evergene. A couple of updates with it, very, very much keeping in time with Visual Studio's 2022 release. It has C#10 support, Visual Studio 2022 support, and a bunch of other improvements there, including a ray tracing API. It is a very cool game engine. I just have trouble telling someone why they should pick this over all the other options that are out there. And of course, Blender 3 was released. Now, through the year, and I skipped over a bunch of them, there were LTS versions or long-term stable versions. There was a ton of support for Blender throughout the year, like Intel and Apple are on board, basically, and Adobe. So Blender got a ton of new sponsors through the year. The one story I decided to kind of nearly end the year on is Blender 3 was released. One of the big things about Blender 3 was Cycles X, because of the 10th anniversary of Cycles. It is a massive performance improvement on Cycles, being 2 to 8 times faster on the rendering side of things. The other big things are the asset browser and the pose library, and you're also getting some VR support, knife tool improvement, and so on. Blender had a heck of a year, and Blender 3 was sort of the capstone of that year. If you haven't checked out Blender in a while, go do so. The sculpting tools, the rendering tools, the real-time renderer, all that stuff, very impressive stuff there. On the topic of Blender, we also have UPGBE 03 was released. Now, UPGBE is the I forget exactly what the UP stands for, but it's the Blender game engine. Blender game engine was removed from Blender in Blender 2.79, I think it was. So quite a few releases back, the Blender game engine stopped. So if you want to develop games in Blender, your only options were sort of like Armory, and the Armory engine kind of went by the wayside as well. But the UPGBE project has kept things alive. This is a port of Blender that keeps the game engine stuff alive, and it now supports Blender 3, and that includes support for the EV real-time PBR-based renderer. Very cool stuff, cool project. If you want to create games entirely in Blender, including the game logic and scripting, or you worked with the Blender game engine in the past and you miss it, UPGBE is here for you. And then another release, again, Flutter 2.8 was released. Now, I mentioned Flutter earlier on with Flutter 2, that they added desktop, mobile, and web support. Here, they also, the Flame game engine was added in as well. Another nice release to go on there. And then we have the O3D game engine had their first major release. This was, I mentioned in the past, this is the fork of Lumberyard, what it became. This release was a complete mess. So if you want to see how bad it went for me, you can check that out there. And then another acquisition kind of to finish the year off is Pixologic, the makers of ZBrush, were acquired by Maxon, the makers of Redshift and Cinema 4D, etc. This almost guarantees that they will be moving to a subscription-only model. Just one of those things to be aware of. And then to end the year, Unigine Engine 2.15 was released. And as I mentioned earlier on, a lot of the features and functionality in this are not in the community version, unfortunately. And that is a worrying trend. And I believe that is the, no, one more. Quixel and Megascans trees were released for Unreal Engine developers. This is basically Quixel's alternative to SpeedTree. A really interesting project and one I highly recommend checking out if you're using Unreal Engine. They released their first pack of trees. It's not just trees. It gives them dynamic properties so they can blow in the wind, multiple LODs and scaling and so on. So if you're interested in using Unreal Engine, a very interesting project for creating trees was released to end the year. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is that whole bunch of acquisitions in 2021. Let me know what you think. Did I miss any major stories? Of course, there was a ton that happened, so it's quite possible I did. There's a lot of waitings for coming in 2022, things that hopefully we will see released, such as Godot and Unreal Engine 5. A lot of acquisitions, basically Unity and Unreal are buying everything, and then other players are jumping in too. So let me know what you think. And that's it. I will talk to you all later. Goodbye.